Well, I didn't think something with such potential could fall so far so fast, and yet here we are. So for context, this video was supposed to be made the other day, but then I did the smart thing. I was always gonna wait, and I waited, and I rewatched the show, and I let my emotions sort of be toned down, and then I was gonna make it on Sunday, and my fridge decided to slowly and loudly die, and so there was nowhere that I could film until today, whence the fridge has been replaced. Thank the gods. So now I am filming at 9 in the morning, and if I'm good about editing, this video will be edited by the end of today so that it will come out and you all can enjoy my insanity rants before the final. Will the final make some of these problems better? No. I did debate waiting until after the final to make this video, but I decided it was worth it to make it in between because I do not want any sort of epic things or any sort of like character things in the final to cloud my judgment of the technical problems with this section of the season. Because I am not going to get into my personal issues with things, which is why the Jonathan Nancy scene in episode 6 is going to be entirely missing from this video. I don't have technical bias ability for that scene. I just have my own personal feelings on it. So we're not talking about that today. Today we are talking about my interpretations and analysis of the writing problems in the season. And I've seen a lot of people throwing around, "Oh, your issues with the writing, you're wrong. It's a great season." No. Okay. And I was saying this last week too. It is not an all or nothing. The people that are saying Volume 2 is the best ever and all the hate is undeserved are incorrect, and the people saying it is the worst piece of media ever released are also incorrect. Both are wrong. There are technical issues with this section that made me dislike it far more than I expected to. I expected to, if not love, enjoy this section of the season. And I can safely assure you that there were about 4 scenes that I loved, that I will quote, that I will enjoy. Five. I'm just counting the end of episode 6 as its own scene. That said, it would be irresponsible for me, because I didn't film this video Sunday, I'm filming it today, to not address the rumors and hearsay of allegedly certain cuts of the episodes being taken out and being forced out by Netflix. This is all alleged. There is no proof. Some people have denied it. Some people have forwarded it. I don't know. I'm skeptical whenever different cuts are brought up. So I have nothing to say on the front of this other than it is something that is happening. And until I have concrete evidence one way or the other, I am not going to bring it into it. However, if allegedly something were to happen and Netflix had cut sections, that may explain some of the really jilted, weird, quick-cutting segments of episodes 5, 6, and 7. It could. Allegedly, if that were the case. Now, that is not to take away from the actual product that we have been given, Season 5, Volume 2, and the actual technical issues, and also just in general issues that I have with it. But before we continue, hi, my name is Rowan. I make videos about media and history and television shows and books that I really enjoy, and I critique them and I talk about them, and one of them that I really enjoy is Stranger Things. And if you are interested in more videos like this one, please consider subscribing, because I already have like 6 different videos talking about Stranger Things and my issues with it, or ensemble things coming that I'm probably going to film all this week because I am on winter break. So what else should I do? So this video today, I really want to focus on what I think is the key element that has caused a lot of these writing issues. Now, in my first video, I talked a lot about a disparity of tone, a shift in tone between different seasons that wasn't necessarily a mark of bad writing, but a mark of changing show. That is not to say, however, that a disparity of tone is the same thing as my issue with Season 5, Volume 2, a disparity of scale. And this is a really important detail that I really want to emphasize here. I am not saying that a shift in scale is bad. However, I am saying that in less time than in the first part, if you've suddenly switched scales entirely, you're gonna have some issues. Now, specifically, I wanted to focus on what a lot of my problems are coming from. They're not the same problems everyone else is having. That's why I thought I'd make this video. I'm not just repeating everyone else's issues. My problems are entirely centered on the disparity of character focus and the fact that the scale of this has turned from a character-centric show to a show in which there are a lot of action set pieces that do not connect to the characters. Now, I really want to compare this, and I'm comparing this because this is a scene I love. The scene where they break into the base, Nancy's, sniping out some soldiers. It's great. The soldiers are like stormtroopers, which is its own issues, but I enjoyed that scene. I like the scene. Fun. There's nothing. There's no quippy dialogue, aside from Murray. Murray was funny. It just feels very jilted. There's no focus. It's just action-packed for about 2 minutes, which is fine. Except in previous action-packed sequences, you get things like, again, I'm comparing this directly to Steve's fistfights. Steve's fistfights, or say Steve fighting the Demogorgon in season 2, or Steve fighting Billy, or even Steve, Jonathan, and Nancy in season 1 with the Demogorgon. These are all, again, action set pieces. They're dramatic, but there is character. You can see the characters' emotions. You can hear their emotions. You get a sense of who they are and what they are and what they're doing. In a lot of the Volume 2 action scenes, I do not get that sense of character. I don't get the sense of this connection, which I think is a detriment to the season. I think that it takes away from a lot of the depth that we could be getting. And again, a lot of people are going to be looking at me and going, Rowan, episode 6. We're going to talk about episode 6 later. Episode 6 is out of the 3, the one I have the least issue with. Episode 7 is the one I have the most issue with, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But to be succinct, this is sort of boils down to my main point of what I think the main problem with this season is. And that is the fact that they were so scared to become the next Game of Thrones that they watered down the emotional heart of the show to the point in which it is just a safe, predictable, action-packed finale. And that is not what people were looking for. And again, I'm doing this now because it could all change tomorrow at 8 p.m. in the final episode. It could all change. But I don't think even changing it, I don't think some big sacrifice or grand twist will fix the fundamental flaw that is Volume 2. Because Volume 2 is a detriment to the overall character arcs of various characters and is so fast-paced and rushed that I genuinely didn't care. That's the problem. It's not that it's bad. It's that it was so mediocre that I had no fear whatsoever that someone I loved was going to die. I had no stress or anxiety. The mark of a good, well-written, climactic segment, a final season, is a show in which, even knowing the characters make it out alive, you're still tense. Or a book. If I could reread a book and still be tense, if the writer is so good that I am still tense reading, consuming this media, and being scared that my character is going to die, even though I know they live, that is the hallmark of a good writer. I was not even scared for Steve. When Dustin is going, you're going to literally die. Was I crying in that scene? Yes, I love that scene. That scene is great. But I wasn't scared. And like I said in my first video, this is not to say that there is a problem with not killing characters. I'm not saying they should have massacred people. I'm saying they should have made me feel like they were going to. I'm saying I wanted the tension without the actual follow-through. And they didn't even give the courtesy of doing that. They were so scared of pissing people off that they made something so safe, it's boring. And that is a problem. And I'd really encourage people who disagree with me in this video, who have an actual argument for why they either liked or did not like this season, to please share it, because I think it's a really interesting discussion to have. And I would love to have a discussion on why this season is a problem outside of my perspective. This is my perspective. This is my issue with the season, but I would love it if I had other people's perspectives as well. As such, I think it is best to start in the simplest, easiest place to have issues with this season. The pacing. The pacing in this show is so monumentally painful to me in Volume 2 that I cannot express it. And I get it. They have a timeline. But I need you all to understand, okay? Logistically, the timeline and the pacing makes no sense. Thing A, how did Steve, Nancy, Jonathan, and Dustin get from the edge of town to the center at the Hawkins lab without Steve's car? There were no bikes, there was no explanation. It should have taken them a while. Thing B, how did Hopper, Elle, and Callie get out of the Upside Down unseen and undetected and end up back at the Squawk from, again, the other side of town in like a couple hours with minimal effort and no screen time? How exactly were these people staying up for like 72 hours straight with not even a care to mention exhaustion? The pacing doesn't make sense. And this is the thing, I would not be upset if the show hadn't already established that it cares about pacing making sense. Even in season 4, there was great care and detail given to the timings, to the pacings. They took the time to show people waking up. They took the time to establish, yes, they took a rest. Yes, it's okay. It's okay. These people have been up for like 48 hours. Now they're sleeping. It's okay. This is something that, again, I'm nitpicking. And I'm being really, really critiquing here, is this ignoring of making sense things. Again, here's the problem. I wouldn't be doing this if the pacing was okay. But the pacing isn't. These are examples of like little plot holes of transportation, little ignoring things that I get. I could look past. If it wasn't for the fact that it was so rushed, this section of the season was so rushed. It was like they were sprinting. They were sprinting to the finish line. They were sprinting to the reveal. Episode 5, pacing-wise, was fine. In terms of connecting me to characters, we'll get back to that. Episode 5 would be fine in a 10-episode show. And this is, I think, my biggest problem with this particular season is the fact that it's 8 episodes. And the way it is paced does not make sense. Going from episode 4 to episode 5, to me, feels like an issue of cliffhanger, an issue of reveal, an issue of the way things are structured. In a 3-act structure, and again, I know television not the same as 3-act structure, but it's a good structure to give examples. In a 3-act structure, you have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. At the end of Act 1, you get an inciting incident. At the end of Act 2, you get a climactic midpoint. At the end of Act 3, you get a conclusion and a resolution. Take this as you will. Episode 4, halfway through the season, was the climactic midpoint. It was. It was objectively the climactic midpoint. If we're taking a 3-act structure, episode 1, Holly getting kidnapped, that's the inciting incident. Episode 4, the climactic midpoint. Will gets his powers. Episode 5 follows up the climactic midpoint with a big cliffhanger. And then episode 6 follows it up with another big cliffhanger. And that is not to say it is bad. Again, in television shows and television pacing, if it's a connected story, I am very pro big cliffhangers at the end of every episode, keeping people invested. I've watched most CW shows. Again, I'm not saying that's bad. I am, however, saying that you are jumping from point to point in such a fast spectrum that I have not appropriately gotten myself invested in this new revelation before we've been given another one. And it feels so rushed. This is, again, my problem. Episodes 5 and 6 were relatively okay. I still think we could have used more time, and there were definitely issues with them that we'll get into in a second. But they were okay. They were good. Episode 6, even, like, by the end of it, I really liked the ending. I think the ending was great. I really liked, again, Dustin and Steve's reconciliation. I think that was genuinely my favorite scene of the season. It was delightful. I was crying. I was literally crying in my living room. But, again, the problem here wasn't that it was bad. It was that it was too fast. It was that we were jumping. We were leapfrogging to point of importance to point of importance. And I know a lot of people are like, okay, it's the final season. Let's throw it. Like, it should make sense by now. But jumping from point to point to point is not a good plan. Jumping from major event to major event to major revelation to major revelation with oddly pointless exchanges of dialogue in between creates for a weirdly paced mess. Take, for instance, episode 5. We are jumping from a major plot point, again, the investigation inside the Upside Down, to more of a minor plot point, the trying to play with Will's powers. And it's minor at this point just because, again, like, they don't know what they're working on. So we get a scene where Robin and Will have, a little chat. Robin and Will, again, I like their dynamic. But overall, it's sort of pointless. It's a waste of lines because this scene is relatively minimal in terms of detail. Like, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. When you're at a point in which you have minimal time, at this point, there were, again, total about 3.5 hours in those 3 episodes. They needed more. And I know a lot of people had issues with how long season 4's episodes were. But because they were so long, they were well paced, they made sense, the detailing, the depth to them, it made sense. I felt constantly like I was missing something. Like there was something crucial that had been skipped over. Like we were jumping, leapfrogging from plot point to plot point with no care for how boring it was. Because this is the thing. I was bored. I was bored when Steve almost died. That's a problem. And this is because specifically, I think the issue, the reason this is how it is because the writers, they said, we do not want to be the next Game of Thrones. How do we not be the next Game of Thrones? And they've said this in interviews. Everyone has been talking, they've been comparing it to Game of Thrones. And I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because their issues with Game of Thrones brought them here. Their issues with Game of Thrones brought them to don't kill people. People were pissed in Game of Thrones and they kill people. Let's kill no one. And again, I'm not saying they need to kill people. I am, however, saying that the will coming out scene, and we'll get to the will coming out scene, having around, I think it was 19 or 20 people in it. The thing about an ensemble is if you do not have enough time to focus on it, if you are skipping, if you are rushing past things, it feels wrong. I'm going to compare this to another Netflix show specifically because I think you see a similar issue in Bridgerton season 3. You have a season 2 with long episodes that fit the story and the necessity and are as long as needed, and they get the point across and it works well pacing wise. And people are complaining about the long episodes, so Netflix probably said, we want shorter episodes. And so they are relatively shorter compared to the previous season, and that is to the detriment because they were probably forcing when writing to jump over things that wanted to be explored because there was a minimal time frame. Why is this episode only 8 seasons and not 9? Why is season 4 9 and not this? Why is the final season of your show 8 episodes? Why? No, please tell me why. Why have you limited? Why are these episodes barely longer than network TV shows? Why? There is an immense problem with the amount that is trying to be jammed into this minimal time. And so many people were like, oh, it's easy to wrap up. The problem is the first 4 episodes were quality. But the first 4 episodes being the way that they were, structured the way they were, meant that this section of the season had to be so tightly written that not a single scene felt out of place, that not a single scene did not connect to the major storyline and the main tissue. Even though most of the scenes did directly correlate to the main problems at hand, it felt so rushed and so empty of character connection that I genuinely did not care. By the end of that season, I was so emotionally uninvested because of the pacing and the writing and the lack of connection, the lack of care for these characters and for these interpersonal relationships. And I'm not saying romance. That's the thing. A lot of people have been focusing specifically on the romances. I'm not talking about the romances. I'm talking about the friendships, about the sibling relationships, about Mike and Nancy, who in the first part of the season were finally bonding and in this barely talk, about Steve and Robin, whose only interaction is a weirdly placed, very intrusive joke that I cannot comprehend why was included if not to be edgy, to Elle and Max, who barely interact, who were best friends in season 3, who just don't interact, to Will and Mike, who again had all these heartfelt emotional scenes in the first part of the season that are now missing, to Will and Jonathan, who have not interacted together on screen this entire season. Yes, they've been in the same room, but they have not interacted. To even Will and Joyce, barely had any screen time together. Joyce and Hop, barely any screen. The intense lack of connection, of characters talking with other characters. The fact that Lucas and Max, in a single section of scenes, have more screen time and dialogue interchanged between the two than entire sections of the main cast. The fact that, again, the main 4 characters, our main 4 male characters, our original main characters, barely interact. No one interacts. Everything is a giant group. Everything is this is this just empty, mechanical, Avengers-esque feeling. And it's painful to me as someone who loves this show to see it like that. But that's my critical issue. That's like the main issue. Now I feel the need to get into the nitty-gritty. What is the nitty-gritty, you might ask? I think these are the most egregious or entertaining examples of my problems with this season. Example 1. Our boys, Steve and Dustin. Yes, Steve and Dustin. We're starting with Steve and Dustin because of course we are. Steve and Dustin are genuinely the only characters this season who I feel like get their full character arc. Am I unhappy about this? No, I am ecstatic. I am jumping for joy. When I tell you the fact that Steve comes up with the plan to save them all, genuinely such an amazing set. I'm so happy they did that. Also, costuming. They put him in a cable knit sweater. Look, okay, they did Steve and they did Dustin well. Steve and Dustin we love Steve. Steve and Dustin at this point are great. They're the only great part of this entire section of the season. They're genuinely the only characters who I think completed their arcs. Not a single other character this season who has had an arc set up has had it reasonably resolved. Nancy's... Okay, you know what? We're gonna get to Nancy next. We'll get to my issues about Nancy next. So Steve and Dustin, I think, are the example of why they needed more character-focused scenes. Because they were such good scenes. Steve and Dustin's scenes were excellent. All of them. They were so well placed. They were so well written. Their fist fight, which you think is just about them, leads to Dustin discovering a major piece of the world and the plot. That is incredible. That is a great use of writing. That is an amazing thing to do. So why didn't other people? Why didn't Will and Robin's destroying of the pumpkin scene lead to some realization that Will has about his powers, or some realization that Robin has, or some idea, like in that big everyone's arguing scene, Steve realizes, he comes to his fruition, he comes to his plan about Jack and the Beanstalk. Why is it that in some of these characters you have these tightly written, excellent scenes that go from emotion to plot beautifully, and in others you just don't? There's no connection in other scenes. And I think this is a real problem because it is a whiplash. It is an emotional whiplash to go from this brilliant acting, this brilliant character-driven emotional scene that also connects to the plot, to whatever the heck was happening in episode 5. You need to connect characters to plot, to story. And when you ignore a character-driven show, a show in which the characters have always been critical in favor of just blind action, you have problems. Specifically here, I want to compare the action sequences in episode 7 to the action sequences in episode 9 of season 4. And specifically, I want to compare, again, Lucas's fight with Jason is pure action, but it's emotional. I am connected to Lucas. I feel the pain because this isn't just a fight to save the world. This is a fight to save Max. It doesn't matter about Hawkins. What matters is Max. And I feel that. You feel that. You are connected. In episode 7, the brief periods of action set pieces, and there are quite a few setups to this that I think are just, again, there's nothing wrong with, again, setting this up. But again, compare the setting up for action sequences in episode 7 to those in episode 8 of season 4. In episode 8 of season 4, they get the stuff. There is fear, there is tension, there is heightened worry during these sections because the football team is there. It's the football team, the basketball team. Because the basketball team is there and they are scared for their safety. And finally, the climactic, again, getting up, preparing to go into the Creole house, that scene, that preparation, no one speaks, but the music and the facial expressions and the way the camera shifts beautifully captures the emotions of the characters. Do you know what emotions I got from the end of episode 7? Nancy had pent-up rage, good for her. Murray's along for the ride, good for him. Steve thinks Murray is a sucky driver, also good for him. And 11 is frowning at the general, who now knows they're all inside and is probably going to send people after them, but doesn't care. That's it. I don't get any other emotion. I don't get any fear. There is no fear from these people who are about to go into the Upside Down to try and save Holly and kill Vecna and destroy They're not scared. There is no valid reason they shouldn't be scared. None. No valid reason they should not be scared. And yet, for some reason, hi, baby. How are you? Okay. Yeah, go back to sleep. Yeah, baby. There is no valid reason that these characters shouldn't be scared, that we shouldn't see fear or anxiety or stress on them as they go through the compound. Even just a background shot of Dustin and Will glancing at each other. Even Mike and Eleven's interaction, even the weird Elle and Collie stuff, and we'll get to that in a second. I don't feel anything. It's an action movie. That is what I feel in this section. It is not an emotionally driven, fantastical show anymore. It is an action film. It has lost its emotion, it has lost its stakes, and it has lost the ability to make me care. When I read a romance novel, I know the main characters have to end up together. It's a genre qualification. But a good writer, especially a good romantic fantasy writer, can make it so that when I am reading this book, even knowing that they're going to come out of it alive, I am stressed, I am scared, I am worried for my favorite characters. I don't feel worried because there have been no stakes established. Again, even in a romance novel where the established rule is main characters make it out alive. When I am watching Stranger Things with no confirmation that anyone's going to make it alive aside from they're not just going to willy-nilly kill, which again, I know they're not going to willy-nilly kill, I should still be worried. I should feel the tension, the palpable tension of this show. I should feel it. I should care. I don't. I do not care. That's the problem. I do not care. And that is a problem of the writing. Because I cared. I like these characters. The fact that I do not care about these characters in this section of the season is a flaw of the pacing and of the writing and especially of the dialogue. And my issue with the dialogue is going to get us to the Will scene. Oh, the Will scene. I'm not going to make some of the shallow arguments I've seen people make. I am going to make one very, very simple, I'm going to ask one simple question here. Why did he need to do it in a room with almost 20 people? Why? Because here's the thing. This is an emotional scene, which for the record is surrounded by scenes filled with dirty jokes and bickering, okay? This emotional scene. Why is it to every single character in the entire show? Why is Murray there? And I know in theory, this is so we can see everyone together, and this can be a combination of forces. Do you know what it actually feels like? It feels like the writers were too scared to have a heart-to-heart, emotional, smaller sequence. A sequence in which Will revealed his feelings to his closest friends and his brother and his mom, who probably know. Why couldn't that have been the scene? Why couldn't this have been a scene where Will tells Dustin, Luke, Mike, Max, and maybe Elle, with Jonathan and Joyce there as support, why couldn't it have been a smaller scene? While, say, Robin, Steve, Nancy, Murray, Erica, and Collie, Mr. Clark Hopper, when they're off preparing, getting stuff ready. Why couldn't that be the scene? Why did it have to be everyone? What writing purpose does it serve? Because again, this is the thing about writing. Everything you do should have a purpose. Even if the purpose is just because the character needs to be developed. If there's a scene you really want to have, what you do is you make sure that it develops your character. If you are writing a fantasy novel and you want to develop your character having magic, you can write a scene where the character, just starts having fun, sitting around, eating some lunch, but then they get to use their magic. You can do whatever you want, but it has to serve a purpose. And this scene does serve a purpose. But the more minute details here is, in a well-written story, in a well-written book or show, the purpose makes sense. The purpose of the detailing makes sense. This is the principle, again, I talked of, I think in the last video as well, of a Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun states that if there is a gun in a scene, if there's anything in a scene, it should be important. Why is everyone in this scene? They didn't have to be. It lessens the emotional weight of the scene by making it a spectacle, by making it a big, large group get-together scene. That is not what this scene needed. This is pointless. What purpose does it serve? Do you know? Do the writers know? I don't. I know what Will's section of it serves. And I like Will's, and I think Will's section of it, and I think the fact that rumors have been swirling that this scene took them like 20 hours to film really prove my point for why it doesn't work in the context. And I'm not saying that Will shouldn't have had a scene like this. I think he should have. But the fact that Will had the scene with everyone and not a small group really takes away from the quality of the scene and the depth of the character. Which brings us to taking away from the quality and depth of character to my girl Nancy Wheeler. I need to express how absolutely insane it is that never once is Nancy mentioning Barb. I'm just wondering, has she gotten over her trauma that was still clearly fresh last season? Because here's the thing. Nancy's guilt in volume 1 makes sense. Her reactions, they make sense. Are you telling me that not once, Nancy goes from pure guilt and determination in the first section of the season to barely having any emotions aside from action badass, which again, I like her as an action badass, outside of that one scene with Jonathan? Why? Why are you... There is no valid reason that there shouldn't have been a line. It could have even been with all of them. Shouldn't have been a passing comment of her issues with Barb. There shouldn't have been a passing, maybe even if it was just a flashback to the vision that Vecna showed Nancy in season 4 with Barb getting dragged away the same way as Holly. Even just a hint of that trauma still being there. Why is it ignored? Why are the emotions and the depths of these characters ignored? On that front, ignoring things that were previously established, which I've got many issues with, Max can walk. Her bones have all healed. Her eyes are fine. I'm not complaining. I'm really happy with the ending we got for Max and Lucas. I think it's lovely. I think that they are, aside from Steve and Dustin, the only combination of characters when this show ends that I think will have genuinely the perfect ending. And for that matter, the weird cultified children in the mindscape, Derek, Derek, what's happening, buddy? Literally, I watched this show with my mom and our family friend, and they were both like, why isn't Derek doing anything during this section of the season? You built up this kid, you built up this character an early part of the season who has now nothing to do. And finally, the piece de la resistance of things that do not make sense and are completely ignored this season. The deus ex machina. That is, the melting room suddenly solidifying just as Nancy and Jonathan have finished their we're dying heart to heart. Now, my final issue with this season connects to this, which is, why is it completely disjointed? Why is it completely ignorant to things that happened in volume 1? Why does this season feel the need constantly to ignore its own characters in favor of not explaining and not interacting? Why is it constantly, desperately trying to do as little as possible when this should be the grand climax? This should be tying up loose ends. I have been given more loose ends in volume 2 than I was in volume 1 or all of season 4. I feel like there is nothing. There's just this big gaping hole. And I think nothing can be displayed about this more thoroughly than Mike Wheeler. Because again, I was not a fan of Mike Wheeler for quite a few seasons. He was not doing it for me. He wasn't well written again. In volume 1, he returned to his leadership role. He returned to his, what I think, proper role, which is, again, he's the MC. He's trying to be a hero. He is a great character in volume 1. And they barely let him do anything in volume 2. What does this boy do? What is... Can you remember a single thing he did that had merit, that had a point? What did this kid do that had purpose in volume 2? Go on, try and think. I will wait. If you can come up with it, please comment. I beg of you. I would love to know. Just, what did he do? What did any of them do? I really want you to think about this. I would really love some discussion in the comments about genuinely what did other people think of this season. Because for me, personally, it felt so empty and so rushed that I did not care. And I didn't want that. And it really saddens me. I think Mike is a great example of this. He was great in volume 1. And in volume 2, he had nothing to do. And again, this is the cost of an ensemble. And this is why, again, I'm a writer. I write multi-POV usually. I write large character casts. And I like things with large character casts. Do you know what you do when you have a large character cast? You separate them into groups. Even at the end, even when everyone's connecting, you still separate into groups. Even say if you have a big discussion scene, you'll branch off into smaller groups so that characters can get their moments and their depth. What's happening? What does Mike do? Okay, wait. He comes up with the plan in WSQK. That's what he does. But it is not focused on. It's ignored. And I think, in essence, that is my problem with this season. That is my sort of ending critique, my final thought for why I dislike this section of the season. Because again, this is the thing. This season, and I think I am safe in saying this, needed to be longer. We needed more character scenes in between the action. Because if there were even, say, 30 more minutes added to each episode, I think a lot of these problems, they would be smaller in hindsight because we'd get more emotional scenes. And to me, I think this abandonment of this emotion and of this connection to character, because I think it is safe to say that when you are lacking connection to characters, you are lacking the connection to what makes things well written. Action films are interesting and they're a valid form of media. But when on a scale I am expecting, and your audience is expecting, character-driven plot stories with dramatic scenes and emotional high points, when the high point and the climax should have as much of an emotional through line as it should an action one, and you completely ignore the emotions, that is when you lose the quality that you once had, and that is when you become a show with problems. I'm going to end the video there because I think that really sums up my main issues with it. I'm not saying, again, and I really want to emphasize this, that this is my least favorite season. I'm not. It's not my least favorite season. It's not the worst show I've ever seen. I've seen plenty of bad things. My issue is not that it's bad. It's that it's okay. It's that it's mediocre. It's that it loses its character and its depth and its emotion and becomes this stale, cardboard, quick to the finish, mass-produced slop. That's my issue, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you are interested in seeing more from me, consider subscribing. I will be doing more Stranger Things videos soon as later this week. I will be making more Stranger Things videos. I have plans for Nancy video that's going to be painful for me to make because their character's been ruined, but it's fine. We'll get to there. But I really want to end on that point, and I hope you all have a lovely day.